Hello everyone, and I hope you're having a wonderful day. Today, we're going to uncover a heartwarming story that began with fear, turned into relief, and ended with an unexpected moment neither Hana nor Tuan saw coming. But here's the question. After rushing toward Tuan's house believing it was on fire, how did a frightening misunderstanding suddenly lead to a special evening shared between two people who had no plans of meeting that day? Join us as we explore a touching story of kindness, gratitude, friendship, and a simple meal that became far more meaningful than either of them expected. If you enjoy emotional and inspiring stories like this one, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss our future videos. Now, let's dive into today's story. For a moment, Hana couldn't move. She stood frozen in place, staring at Tuan as if she wasn't entirely sure he was really there. Only seconds earlier, panic had taken over her thoughts. She had been convinced something terrible was happening. The thick smoke rising above the house, the empty yard, the locked gate. Everything had pointed toward the same frightening conclusion. Now suddenly, Tuan was standing right in front of her. Healthy, safe, completely unaware of the storm of emotions she had just experienced. Tuan looked at Hana with confusion written all over his face. Then he glanced toward the house, then toward the smoke drifting into the afternoon sky, and finally back toward Hana again. "What happened?" he asked. Only then did Hana realize she was still breathing heavily. Without wasting time, she immediately pointed toward the roof. "I thought your house was on fire." The words came out almost automatically. The fear was still fresh, still visible in her eyes. For a brief second, Tuan looked surprised. Then, he followed her gaze toward the source of the smoke. The realization hit him immediately. A smile spread across his face, and before long, he couldn't help laughing. Not because Hana's concern was unreasonable, but because the misunderstanding was so unexpected. The smoke wasn't coming from a fire. It wasn't a disaster. And fortunately, nothing dangerous was happening at all. Tuan shook his head gently. No, everything is fine." He pointed toward the back area of the property. "It's only cooking smoke." Hana blinked. For a moment, she simply stood there processing his explanation. Then a long breath escaped her lips. Relief washed over her almost instantly. The tightness in her chest disappeared. The fear that had built up over the last few minutes slowly faded away. She placed one hand against her heart. "I was really worried." Tuan smiled. "I can see that." The two exchanged a brief laugh, and just like that, the tension disappeared. The atmosphere became lighter, warmer, more comfortable. Then Tuan noticed something else. A familiar aroma drifted through the air. The smell immediately caught his attention. He turned his head, and finally saw the fish roasting over the charcoal fire nearby. His eyebrows lifted in surprise. The fish was enormous, golden skin slowly crisping over the heat, smoke curling upward into the afternoon sky. The sight made him stop completely. He looked from the fish to Hana, then back to the fish again. "Wait." His expression became even more confused. "What's going on here?" Only then did Hana remember why she had come in the first place. The misunderstanding about the smoke had distracted both of them. She smiled awkwardly, then began explaining everything from the beginning. She told him about her day, the work in the fields, the heat, the ditch near the road, the moment she spotted the fish, the effort it took to catch it, and finally, her decision to bring it to him. Tuan listened quietly, without interrupting, without taking his eyes off the fish. As Hana continued, he slowly began understanding the entire situation. She had caught the fish. She had carried it all the way to his house. She had found the gate locked, and instead of leaving, she had stayed behind and started cooking it so he could enjoy it immediately after returning home. The realization left him speechless. For several seconds, he said nothing at all. The fish itself was impressive. A snakehead fish that size wasn't easy to catch, especially on a day as hot as this one. But what truly affected him wasn't the fish. It was the thought behind it, the effort, the kindness, the consideration. Someone had spent part of their day thinking about him. Someone had wanted to share something valuable with him. That meant more than he could easily express. Finally, Tuan smiled. A genuine smile, one filled with appreciation. "You didn't have to do all this." Hana shrugged lightly. "I wanted to." The answer was simple, but sincere, and somehow that made it even more meaningful. For a few moments, neither said anything. The smell of grilled fish continued filling the yard. The late afternoon sunlight cast long shadows across the ground. Everything felt peaceful again. Then Tuan remembered something. Hana had been working all day too. She had spent hours under the same scorching sun. She looked tired. Her clothes showed signs of a long day of labor. And yet she had still found the energy to come here. Immediately, he stepped toward the house. "Come inside." Hana looked surprised. "You've been outside all afternoon." Before she could respond, he opened the door. "At least have some water." After a brief hesitation, Hana nodded. The truth was, she was thirsty, very thirsty. Inside the house, the air felt cooler, more comfortable. The quiet interior offered welcome relief from the heat outside. Tuan quickly poured a large glass of water and handed it to her. Hana accepted it gratefully. The first sip felt incredibly refreshing. Cold water after a long day beneath the summer sun always seemed to taste better. She drank slowly, enjoying every moment. Meanwhile, Tuan sat across from her. For the first time all day, both of them had an opportunity to relax. The pressure of work was gone. The rush of responsibilities had faded. Only conversation remained. Naturally, they began talking about their day. Tuan explained why he had been gone so long. A trip to the market had taken more time than expected. Unexpected delays kept him away longer than planned. Hana nodded. That explained everything. The locked gate, the empty house, the long wait. Soon, they found themselves laughing about the misunderstanding involving the smoke. What had seemed terrifying only minutes earlier now felt almost funny. The more they talked, the more comfortable the conversation became. Stories flowed naturally. Work, weather, the harvest, life in the village. Everything seemed easier to discuss. Outside, the fish continued cooking. The aroma drifting through the open doorway reminded them that dinner was getting closer. Then, during a casual conversation about the market, Hana happened to mention the corn she had brought home earlier. Several bags of fresh corn from the day's work. Enough to feed more than one person. The comment sparked an unexpected idea. Both of them glanced toward the fish, then toward each other. The fish was already large. The corn would be more than enough. And suddenly, a simple possibility appeared. Hana smiled, a thought forming in her mind. Maybe there was no reason for either of them to eat alone tonight. Maybe this unexpected meeting wasn't finished yet. Maybe the evening had one more surprise waiting for them. The idea lingered in the air for a moment. Neither of them spoke immediately, but both seemed to be thinking the same thing. Outside, the fish continued roasting over the charcoal fire. The rich aroma drifted through the yard and into the house. It was impossible to ignore. The fish was large enough for several people, far more than either of them could finish alone. At the same time, Hana had mentioned the corn she had brought home from the market earlier that day. Fresh corn, recently harvested, still sweet from the field. The more they thought about it, the more obvious the answer became. Hana smiled first. Maybe we should eat together. The suggestion felt natural, simple, as though it had been waiting quietly between them all along. Tuan looked at her for a second, then laughed. I was thinking exactly the same thing. The decision was made almost instantly. There was no reason to complicate things, no need for a formal invitation, no need for elaborate planning. Just two people sharing the results of a long day of work. Sometimes, those were the best meals of all. They stepped back outside together. The evening sunlight had softened considerably. Golden rays stretched across the village. The harsh heat that had dominated the day was finally beginning to fade. A light breeze moved through the trees. For the first time since morning, the weather felt comfortable. Tuan checked the fish. The skin had turned beautifully golden. Small droplets of oil crackled over the charcoal. The smell alone was enough to make anyone hungry. Hana smiled with satisfaction. All the effort had been worth it. The fish looked perfect. While Tuan continued watching the fire, Hana volunteered to prepare a few additional ingredients. She knew exactly what would make the meal even better. Fresh vegetables, a little spice, something simple to complement the fish. Without wasting time, she walked toward the small garden nearby. The plants had grown well, healthy and green, despite the recent heat. She carefully picked several fresh chilies, then found a ripe lemon hanging from a branch. The ingredients were modest, but they were enough. Everything about the meal reflected the life they lived. Simple, honest, uncomplicated. When Hana returned, Tuan was already transferring the fish from the grill. The sight immediately made her hungry. The fish looked even better up close. Golden skin, tender meat, perfectly cooked. Together, they began arranging everything. Fresh corn, grilled fish, lemon, chilies, nothing fancy. Yet somehow, the meal felt special. Perhaps because both of them had contributed something. Or perhaps because neither had expected to spend the evening this way. The sun slowly moved lower in the sky. Long shadows stretched across the yard. The village became quieter. Families were beginning their own dinners. Smoke drifted from distant kitchens. Dogs barked occasionally somewhere down the road. The peaceful sounds of evening surrounded them. Finally, everything was ready. The two sat down together. For a moment, neither spoke. They simply looked at the meal before them. The result of an unexpectedly eventful day. A fish caught in a ditch. A misunderstanding involving smoke. An unexpected reunion. And now this, a shared dinner. Tuan broke the silence first. "You worked hard for this fish." Hana laughed softly. So did the fish. The comment made both of them laugh. The tension that once existed between them had completely disappeared. The conversation flowed naturally, easy, comfortable, as if they had known each other for much longer than they actually had. Tuan carefully separated a piece of fish and placed it onto Hana's plate. "This part is the best." Hana immediately shook her head. "You should keep it." But Tuan insisted. "You caught it." Eventually she accepted. The gesture was small, yet it revealed something important. Mutual respect, mutual appreciation. Neither wanted to take more than the other. Neither wanted the other person to feel overlooked. As they ate, the flavor exceeded expectations. The fish was fresh and sweet. The meat was firm. The smoky aroma blended perfectly with the lemon and chilies. Every bite seemed to make the meal even more enjoyable. "This is delicious," Hana admitted. Tuan smiled proudly. The grilling helped. The fish helped more. Another laugh, another easy moment. As the meal continued, the conversation shifted toward everyday life. Work in the fields, the weather, the market, future plans. Nothing dramatic, nothing extraordinary. Yet every topic seemed interesting. Not because of what they discussed, but because of who they were sharing it with. The sky gradually turned orange, then gold, then soft shades of purple. The final light of day painted the countryside in warm colors. For a moment, everything seemed peaceful, almost timeless. Hana looked toward the horizon. The evening felt different from most evenings, not because something major had happened, but because something meaningful had happened. A simple act of kindness had led to an unexpected gathering. A fish she almost never caught had become the center of an entire evening. And a misunderstanding that briefly caused panic had ultimately brought laughter instead. Life worked in strange ways sometimes. Tuan seemed to be thinking something similar. He looked toward the remaining fish and smiled. "When I left this morning, I definitely didn't expect this." "Neither did I," Hana replied, and that was the truth. The entire day had unfolded differently than either of them imagined, yet somehow everything had turned out well, better than expected. As darkness slowly settled across the village, the meal finally came to an end. The plates were nearly empty. The conversation remained warm. Neither seemed eager to rush the moment. For a little while longer, they simply sat there, enjoying the cool evening air, enjoying the quiet village, and appreciating the unexpected gift of good company. What began with worry and confusion had transformed into something neither could have planned: a memorable evening, a shared meal, and a simple reminder that sometimes the most meaningful moments arrive when we least expect them. In this episode, Hana's panic quickly turns into relief when she discovers that the smoke rising from Tuan's house is not a fire at all, but simply cooking smoke. After clearing up the misunderstanding, Tuan is surprised to learn that Hana has brought him a large snakehead fish she spent hours catching under the scorching summer sun. Touched by her kindness and thoughtfulness, he invites her inside to rest and enjoy a cold drink. As they talk about their day, the atmosphere becomes warm and comfortable, filled with laughter and genuine appreciation. Their conversation soon leads to an unexpected idea. With a freshly grilled fish and sweet corn from Hana's harvest, they decide to share a meal together. What begins as a moment of fear and confusion gradually becomes a memorable evening, proving that simple acts of kindness can create meaningful connections and unforgettable memories.